What I'd like to do today is to introduce you to the rewarding pastime of making mission cord rosaries and to show you how to make them. To make our rosary, we'll need some basic materials. We'll need 60 inches of size 9 cord, preferably bonded to stop it unraveling. We'll need exactly 59 beads, any colour will do. And to finish off, we'll need a crucifix, either metal or plastic, and we'll need a rosary tool like this one, which is a grooved piece of plastic, but you can also use an old umbrella rib. It'll do the job just as well. So a quick recap: the things that we need: 60 inches of cord, 59 beads, a crucifix, a rosary making tool, and patience. To get started, hold the rosary making tool in your left hand, or if you're left-handed, hold it in your right hand. Make sure you've got about 5 inches of string hanging over, lay it over the top of the tool and make what we call an X by winding the cord back over itself, as you see in the illustration. Once we've done that, we make 4 turns usually. It's up to you how many you want to use, but it'll use up more string. And then we push the long end of the string underneath those little coils we've just made and pull them out the other end, and then we slide that knot off the rosary making tool and slowly twirl the knot to make it firm and neat. So now we've started our rosary. We've got our first knot, which is going to stop the beads sliding off the end, and starting at the other end we start feeding on the first 10 beads. This stage is pretty straightforward, but it's important to make sure that the end of your string has been either dipped in say something like nail varnish or candle wax to keep it rigid and make it easy to push it through the holes. I'll just put another bead on here to finish the first decade, and now we'll go to the next section, which is tying another knot and putting on our first Our Father bead. So here we've got our first 10 beads, and now we take the rosary tool and tie another knot, but leave a short piece of string between the last bead and where you're going to tie the knot, so that there'll be some area for that for those beads to move up and down the string, so that when a person's praying with them, they're not stiff and they can move each bead individually as they move from Hail Mary to Hail Mary. So here, as you can see, we've taken that knot, left that little space, and just a little bit of pulling and pushing with your fingers can make sure that that knot is nice and neat and firm. And you can see the little space there that we've allowed to give that little bit of play, and so that when people have the rosary beads in their pocket, they're not rigid. So next stage, as you can see here, I'm having a little bit of difficulty with the end of the string. But all I'd normally do is dip that in a bit of wax, but that problem's solved, and we start putting the Our Father bead on. Now with the Our Father bead, that needs to be contained within 2 knots. So make that other knot as close as you can to the Our Father bead. All the knots are done exactly the same way. So here, as you can see, we're making the knot on the tool, sliding it off, and then the knots will move on the string backwards or forwards for a short distance, so you've got a little bit of play, and there's that Our Father bead nicely contained between the 2 strings. Now that we've made 1 decade of the rosary, we just repeat the process until all 5 decades are finished. That brings us to the stage where we need to make the rosary center and then carry on to eventually adding the crucifix. What I'm going to show you now is how to bring those 2 pieces of string together as if they were 1 piece of string, and tie them together to form a knot which will give us our rosary center when taken together with the 2 knots at the end of each of the opposite end of the rosary at the end of each of the decades. Now, as you can see on the screen, I'm tying the last knot of the 5th decade. So we don't add an Our Father bead at this stage, because now got to bring those two ends together, and we've got our 5 decades with the 4 Our Father beads interspersed between those. We bring the 2 strings together, and now we take the rosary tool, hold it exactly as we would if we were making another knot, and wrap the 2 strings around as if they were one, exactly the same way. The only difference is that because there are 2 strings, we only need to wrap it around twice. That'll give us 4 coils, 2 from each of the strings. I find that it's easier to push each string through individually. You can do both at the same time, but that can be a bit cumbersome with a fairly narrow channel in your the groove in your rosary tool. So push them both through, but one at a time, and then slide off the knot just as we would with any one of our other knots in the rosary. And it's up to you how close you want to have those for your center. I'm just tightening them here, and I'll give them a little bit of pressure just to make sure they're firm, and there it is. We have our rosary center, and it'll look something like this in this next diagram. The number of coils you use depends on you. Some people use 3, some use 4, but you need to remember that the more you use, the more string you'll use. Now that we brought our string together and formed a center, we need to look at adding the 5 remaining beads, and the first of those is the Our Father bead. So we'll start with that next. Here I've slid the Our Father bead on, but what I'm doing is pushing that bead over both strings. You can just put them on the one long string and cut the other string short, but I find that that leaves a knot hanging over the edge, and that eventually frays. So having put them all onto one bead, and you'll see this happening just here. Put them all onto one string. We're just pulling that through now. When I pull that up to the end and eventually cut off the short string, that piece of string that's cut off is going to be concealed in the Our Father bead, and it really does make for a much neater finish. And it means when we finish the whole rosary, you'll see that the way I put the final bead on after the crucifix, that all the short ends, or all the ends of the strings are concealed, and there's nothing there to fray in the future and look untidy or eventually come undone. So here we're doing the Our Father bead just the same as we would in the middle of the rosary. Having threaded it onto the 2 strings, I'm now pushing the knot up tight against the Our Father bead, and you can see the other piece of string protruding, and I'll cut that off. If you put a bit of tension on that when you cut it, you'll find that it'll shrink back into the bead. This diagram gives you a much better idea of what the Our Father bead looks like after you've pushed it up over both strings, and you cut the short string as close as you can to the Our Father bead. Got our first Our Father bead on. We check that the knots are nice and tight, and that looks fine. So now we'll add 3 Hail Mary beads. Just take the end of the string and add the beads. Doesn't take terribly long. Here goes number 2 and number 3. So we'll just slide all of those down, and as you can see, there's our 3 Hail Mary beads. So now we'll need to do one more Our Father bead. So we follow the same process, tie another knot, and that's the good thing about rosary making. It's a repetitive process, so you can only get better with practice. Here we go, manoeuvring that knot and leaving a little bit of space between the bead and the knot so that those beads will slide when people are praying with them. So this is getting pretty close to the end now, and our next stage is going to be to add the last Our Father bead, but we don't tie that off straight away. What we're going to need to do is to fix our crucifix on. So what we do is slide the string through the hole, and I wrap it around the crucifix more or less in a lasso type method, and having made that little lasso, I've now fixed the crucifix on, and now I'll adjust the length of the string so that the cross is about, I guess, 3/4 of an inch, or it'll end up about 3/4 of an inch below the last Our Father bead. But that's a matter of personal taste. Some people might have it an inch, some might have it the length of the cross itself. So here I've worked out exactly where I want the cross, tightened the string, and this diagram illustrates that lassoing process. So now that I've got the cross, I could tie an Our Father bead off. You can see the distance there between the bead and the cross. I could tie it off, but I like to do this concealing method of hiding the string within the bead itself. So there's a little bit of a technique to that. So I actually tie the knot as if I was going to finish off here, and it's exactly the same type of knot, but a reverse process. This time you hold the cross in your hand and work back towards the rest of the rosary. So here's the knot. We're just about to slip it off the rosary tool, and as you can see, instead of tightening it, I pulled it back towards the crucifix itself. This gives me enough room to maneuver the end of the string, so I lay it flat across the main cord and maneuver that Our Father bead just like I did with the first Our Father bead at the beginning of this last part of the rosary. It can be a little bit tricky, but if I can do it, you can do it. And as you see, I'm just getting that little bit of string there. Nearly got it, but I need to drag the whole bead and string forward to give me the room to maneuver. Now I've got it. So I'll just pull that through and slide the bead up. Now I can slide the whole knot up as well, up to the Our Father bead, pull it nice and tight. There we go. Now all I have to do, once I'm happy that that's nice and tight, is to cut that, and our rosary's finished. So here we see, and if I keep tension on that string when I cut it, as with the other one, that a little bit of string will conceal itself in the bead, and that rosary will be safe. So here we are. I'm just checking the rosary now to make sure that I've got 10 beads in each decade, and it's best to do that as you're going, because once you've cut the string, there's no turning back. And checking that I've got my Our Father beads. That's a common mistake that people make. They miss an Our Father bead, they tie the knot before it and then add their beads. So if you'd like to get more information, you can contact Our Lady's Rosary Makers here in Australia at the email address shown, or you can have a look on the web at the international chapter of Our Lady's Rosary Makers, the people who started it all in the first place. What I'd like to show you in the next segment is how to make a rosary using a centre. In the previous rosary that we made, we used the ends of the string itself to form our rosary centre, but some people may like to make rosaries in the more traditional way, the same as I guess the metal ones that you'd buy, because you may want to make more elaborate rosaries at some stage for gifts, for friends and relatives, for baptisms, confirmations, weddings, etc. So to make a mission cord rosary, or a rosary, a cord rosary using a rosary centre, we take a centre and pass a string through. One of the top holes will make the rosary main part of the rosary body first. We allow, again as we did with our original rosary, about 4 or 5 inches. This time though we hold the rosary centre in our hand, and I'm using for my rosary making tool a rib from an old umbrella. You can see the little groove in the top there. And this is a very inexpensive way and almost inexhaustible supply of rosary making tools by just chopping up these ribs from an old umbrella. So we take the rosary centre, hold it in our left hand. I take the short end of the string. You could just as easily use the long end with this. Take the short end of the string and tie a knot as we do for any other knot with our rosaries. There we go, 2, 3, 4. And I'll use 4 turns this time. Sometimes I use 6 if I want to make it look a little bit more glamorous, but it does use more string, so you have to be aware of that. And here I am just tightening that initial knot, and I don't tighten it up hard against the rosary centre because I like to have a bit of flexibility in the rosary itself when it's finished. So there, we've started our rosary. We've attached the first end. So now what I'll do is put the beads on as I would with a normal rosary, and I'll do that, and I'll be back to you in a minute and show you how to tie off the main body of the rosary, the 5 decades, and then how to attach the rest of our rosary and crucifix to the bottom end of the centre. Okay, we've reached the other end of our string now, and as you can see, I've threaded on all the beads. I've got my centre, and I put on the 5 decades here. So what I'm going to do now is to finish off this part of the rosary, and that is attaching the 5 decades to the centre. So again, I take my centre in my left hand, pass the string through, and then draw that string through to where I want to tie off my next bead, or to tie off that last piece of string, leaving a little bit of space. I'll have some room to manoeuvre, so I can slip that knot back. So take that tool in my left hand, take the bead, the centre of my left hand, and start winding that string. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. Same, just to match up with the original side that I did. And here we go. Slide that off and start tightening that knot. There we go. So make sure I'm happy with that. And remember, with these two, with the rosaries, if you're ever not happy with a knot, there we go, that's fine. You can always undo it and start again. The only time you're restricted, obviously, is once you've cut that cut the string. I mean, go back and undo all the knots if you find you've made a mistake halfway through, and redo them. But once you've cut the string and left it too short, then there's not much you can do. So now, as you can see, that's all joined up. We've joined the centre, and I've got all the 5 decades of my rosary all ready to go. So before we get to the next stage, we may as well trim off these. What I like to do is usually to cut off about, or leaving about quarter of an inch or so, and this longer string is the piece that we're going to use to complete our rosary. So there you can see those little ends. You might like them a little bit shorter or a little bit longer, but it just gives a little bit of safety to the knot. Make sure they're nice and tight. And this type of knot doesn't unravel very easily because it tends to tighten around the string. But you can always touch these up too with a little bit of clear nail varnish to give them that additional bit of support. Next stage of our rosary is to tie the last 5 beads on and the crucifix on, so we need to fix this onto the centre. So we'll do that in a second. So we're coming to this final stage now, and again you have the choice of either tying the long string around the short string or vice versa, but I find you're better off tying the short string around the long string, otherwise you end up with like a lasso effect, and there's always the potential that that string could pull through and undo, although as I say it's unlikely with this type of knot because it tends to bind around the string. So what I'm going to do here is I take my rosary making tool, centre in my left hand, and I'll give myself enough string, plenty to finish off with here, and again I'll do my 4 knots, 4 coils, 1, 2, 3, whoop, start that again. I'll bring it closer to the end this time. Let that slip out of my hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I've left this a bit short, but you'll get used to this too. Occasionally you'll find that you've left yourself short on a piece of string, but it's worth practicing. And here we go. That's almost through. I'll push that up to the end. Got the end of it. There we go. I'll slide that up to where I want it and tighten that. What I do from here is the same as with our chord center rosaries. I'll leave that little piece of string on and I'll thread the Our Father bead on and use that concealing method that I showed you in the original. So lay that piece of string up along the side of the bead and start maneuvering that Our Father bead over the top. It's really not that hard once you get used to it. See, that's pretty quick that time. So that's now up and firm. That bead's well covers that other piece. This short piece of string is now concealed inside there. So I'll tie off that knot before cutting that piece of string. Actually, I'll show you what I normally do. Is I normally cut it off beforehand and cut it off fairly close. So there you go. You can see how that's concealed within there. And whatever you do, don't let that bead slip off, because it's virtually impossible to push that short piece of string back into the bead. So here we go. I've got the tension on and just push that knot up firm. And there's no way that that knot can move, that bead can move, and that little piece of string is nicely contained within there, and it's never going to fray or show, and it does make for a nice neat finish. So now I'll add the 3 Hail Mary beads. I may as well do that while you're watching. 1, 2, 3. And we'll tie that off. And I'll just tighten that up and leave that little bit of maneuvering space for these beads. There we go. I'll say previous one, so whenever someone's praying, they've got enough room to move those beads backwards and forwards. So now we come to our last Our Father bead, and as before, we don't tie that off yet. We've got plenty of string left here, but you'll find when you're doing this in practice that you need to have a little bit of more string than you imagine, because whilst the knot itself might only take an inch or an inch and a half of string, you need 2 times that to be able to tie it, and you'll know what I'm talking about when you start doing it. Okay, so we take our crucifix and again use that method I was talking about of lassoing the crucifix. Push that through so that, there we go, you can see that effect there. Where's my end here? So I'll bring that up to roughly where I want the top of the crucifix. So there, I think that's roughly where I'd like to have it. So I'll tie a knot. There we go. Cross in the left hand, or crucifix in the left hand. Round 4 times. 3, 4. Slide my piece of string through. Slide the knot off. And like I say, I could just pull that up there and cut that off and the rosary would be finished, but what I like to do is to conceal the end of the string in the knot. So I slide the knot back. You can see that, I think, on the screen here. Bring the end of the string down close to the crucifix, parallel to the other piece of string to give me enough room to maneuver, and keep that piece of string down there. Start maneuvering the bead over that end of string. Well, this one's going to give me a hard time. So what I'll do just tighten that up a little bit. And as I say, what I'd normally do if I find I'm having real difficulty with it is put a little piece of a little bit of wax on. This one's just a matter of getting it over the very tip, and then the rest is pretty straightforward. See that? It's working here. There it is. It's through. Just pull that. I've got big fingers, which makes it a bit tricky. Pull that knot up, and you see it's right through the other side of the knot now, this piece of string. So when I cut that off, pull that back, it's nice, concealed within the knot there, and it's not going to fray. So we've learned how to put on a rosary centre, and it's not that difficult, is it? You know? So there's our rosary, and this time with a centre. Well, in the next video that I do for you, we'll have a go at making rosaries out of metal, how to make the chain, and how to use pliers to put those together. Oh, I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.